You are not dead. But you are no longer alive either. The heat has blistered your lips into silence. Your tongue is too swollen to form a prayer. You've stopped trying. Above you, the sky does not shift. It glares down like an unblinking god, indifferent to your rot. Flies dance in slow circles over your eyes, your cheeks, your open mouth. You feel them land. You feel them walk. You feel them feed. You are floating not in water, but in filth. Not in death, but in something slower. The wood beneath your back is slick, warm, and splitting in places, just wide enough for your own waist to rise back into your skin. Your arms cannot move. Your legs are locked in place. But your mind is still awake. You do not know how long it has been. The sun says morning. The insects say eternity. Something writhes beneath your ribs. Not hunger, not memory, something else. Something alive that was not born with you. Your eyelids no longer close. The flesh there has puffed and split. Your vision is a blur of brightness and shadow and the sick rhythm of wings. You remember milk. You remember honey. You remember the hands that fed it to you, gently, almost lovingly. You remember the sweetness. And now you understand why. The sweetness was not for you. It was an offering, a signal, a scent to summon what would come next. They called it mercy once, that you would not die by blade or fire or fall, that you would return to the earth the way meat returns to flies. But this is not mercy. This is theater. This is spectacle. This is your body on display as a lesson. And somewhere nearby they are watching, counting the days, whispering bets on when the skin will break from within, when the last breath will bubble through the waist. But not yet. Today you still breathe. And the swarm still waits. They never carved his name into stone. No monument, no grave, no inscription. Only the method survived. And the silence around it. The scribes who recorded it didn't speak with certainty. They whispered. One said it happened in the deserts near Babylon. Another placed it on the edge of a marsh, where the sun boiled men from the inside out. One account claimed it was a soldier. Another said it was a traitor. All agreed on only one thing. He was eaten alive, slowly, publicly, and without mercy. His crime is a mystery wrapped in rumor. Some claimed he killed a prince. Others said he spoke when he wasn't supposed to. One version, never confirmed, claimed he dared to take credit for a king's victory, not with weapons but with words. And in an empire where kings were gods, even truth could be treason. No one knows his face. No drawings. No coins, only a shape, trapped in a boat, screaming without sound, rotting by the hour. A man who once stood upright, who once believed the rewards of loyalty would outlast the heat of ambition. A man who discovered, too late, that the mouth which tells the truth must be buried deeper than the man who lives it. The records that survive do not agree. The scribes argue across centuries. One scroll mentions the condemned, lashed between two hollow timbers. Another writes only of the one who fed the swamp. His identity was scraped away, but the manner of his death was preserved in grotesque detail, like a relic, like a warning. He became less of a man and more of a message. Proof that power does not forget insults, that kings do not correct their stories. They correct the men who speak too clearly. He might have been called Mithridates, or something else. But names don't survive long in the mouths of maggots. What remains is the echo of wood creaking in the heat, of flies thickening in clouds, of flesh surrendering to the swarm. His voice is gone, but the manner of his silencing was so precise, so excessive, that even history could not look away. And now you've heard it too. You've opened the box they tried to bury. If that disturbs you, ask yourself why. And if you believe stories like this should never be forgotten, subscribe to Cursed Chronicles. But if you won't, if this is just another horror to scroll past, then step into the comments and say why. Say why this man's death deserves no memory. We'll wait. Truth was a fragile thing in the ancient world. It didn't live in books. It wasn't carved into walls. It lived in the mouths of men, and it died there too. Kings didn't need to silence thousands. They only needed to silence one. The world before paper was ruled by memory. And memory could be molded. A battlefield could become a stage. A coward's retreat could be reshaped into divine strategy. A soldier's strike could become a king's miracle. There were no printing presses, no photographs, no scrolls passed from house to house. There were only scribes with trembling hands, priests who knew when to nod, and witnesses who understood that some stories were not theirs to tell. Because when a king tells the story of his own victory, no one interrupts. The man in the boat, whoever he truly was, learned this too late. Maybe he believed that truth had weight, that facts would defend him. Maybe he thought the king would reward honesty the way he had rewarded blood. But kings do not reward memory. They reward myth. And every myth must have a hero. In this story, the hero had to be divine, chosen, radiant beneath the banner of destiny. He could not share that light with a soldier, especially not one who had seen too clearly. So the soldier became a threat, not because he lied but because he didn't. He didn't whisper. He didn't flatter. He told the truth. And in doing so, he carved a crack into the facade of the throne. That could not be allowed. The punishment had to match the crime. It wasn't enough to kill the man. He had to be unmade, publicly, slowly, until his body, like his words, collapsed into silence. In time, the myth held. The scribes wrote what they were told. The priests sang the approved version. And the people, those who remembered what really happened, either forgot or learned to forget. This is how royal lies are born. Not in shadow but in sunlight. Not by fear but by repetition. 1,000 retellings, until the lie feels older than the truth itself. And somewhere between those retellings, the man in the boat disappeared. Not just from history but from the story he died to correct. But now you remember him. You've heard what they tried to drown beneath the swamp. So the question becomes, if history forgets the truth, will you help preserve it? Subscribe to Cursed Chronicles, and prove that the silenced still have a voice. If you won't subscribe, at least tell us in the comments why this story doesn't deserve to be heard. Because forgetting is easy, and that's exactly why they chose to kill him that way. First, they made you drink. Not wine, not water, not poison. A mixture warm, thick, sweet, and rotting. Milk turned sour in the sun. Honey scraped from the bottom of old jars. You were made to swallow it all, again and again, until your stomach swelled and your body fought back. But they didn't stop. They held your nose, tilted your head, poured it down your throat until you choked on sweetness. Then they waited, because they weren't feeding you. They were feeding the decay. Your body began to rebel almost immediately, cramping, churning, loosening control of itself. You filled the hollow around you with filth, the mixture of your own waste and the syrupy residue still clinging to your skin. But they weren't done yet. They smeared more honey across your mouth, your eyelids, between your toes, under your arms, in every soft place flesh could break. You were not tied to a stake. You were not hung from a wall. You were fitted, wedged between two carved troughs of wood. One beneath your body, soaked already in damp heat. Another laid gently across your torso, pressing you into place. Not tight enough to crush you, just tight enough to keep you still, to ensure you would feel everything. They left your face exposed, your arms too, your feet dangling awkwardly. They wanted you visible, vulnerable, accessible. Then they placed you not in a prison but in a pond. A shallow, stagnant body of water thick with algae, dead fish, and the warmth of a slow summer. No movement, no current, just a cradle of stillness, perfect for what was about to arrive. The insects were first, drawn not by blood, but by the sugar. Flies, beetles, wasps, gnats, they came in clouds. They landed gently at first, curious, probing, but then the feeding began. Flies laid eggs in the corners of your mouth, in the crusted mucus around your eyes, in the folds of skin behind your ears, where sweat and honey had pooled into something unnatural. Forensic science tells us the maggots would hatch within hours, burrowing into the soft tissue, finding warmth, moisture, darkness. They do not wait for death. They do not ask permission. They eat what's warm, what's still pulsing. Maggots prefer soft tissue, lips, eyelids, genitals. They find the wounds. They make wounds. Their mouths are hooks, their bodies razors. They feed as they move, breaking skin, tunneling through fat, reducing the living to pulp. And they bring others. The rot sends a signal. A pheromone storm. Carrion beetles. Flesh flies. Parasitic wasps. Species we now study under microscopes once swarmed this man's open eyes. Your blood, now exposed through cracks in the skin, mixed with the waste at your back and the bile in your mouth. The pond water soaked into your wounds. The sun blistered your forehead. And there was nowhere to go, nowhere to run, no angle to flinch. The method was not fast. That was the point. It was designed to be slow, to let infection bloom like a second death inside your first. As your immune system collapsed under the onslaught, bacteria, rot, heatstroke, your organs began to fail. But even then, consciousness held on. Forensic pathology suggests that the pain would trigger cortisol spikes, then delirium, then coma. But that coma never came, because the pain changed. It didn't numb. It evolved. It shifted from burning to stabbing to chewing to something without name. Something that lived in your bones. Something that taught you new definitions of agony. And above it all, the sound. Not your screams. Those ended long ago. But the hum of flies. The rhythmic ripple of wings. The buzz of a world that saw your body as nothing more than soil in waiting. This was not execution. This was repurposing. You were food. Fertilizer. A theater for what nature could do when man stood still. They say it lasted 17 days. That he didn't die of pain but of infection. That even after the face was no longer recognizable, the breath still shuddered through the chest. Barely, but enough. Enough to prove he was still there. Enough to remind every onlooker what happened to those who spoke too much. So now you know what was done. Now you've seen how far they went to erase a man from a lie. If that makes you uneasy, ask yourself why it was ever forgotten. And if you believe the truth shouldn't rot in silence, subscribe to Cursed Chronicles. But if you can watch all this, feel nothing, and still refuse to act, then go to the comments. Tell us why. Explain why this story should be buried again. And why the swarm deserves to win. 17 days. That is not a death. It is an unraveling. Most executions end quickly, by blade, by fire, by fall. Even the cruelest methods have a limit. The body gives out. The mind collapses. The silence arrives. But this was not a death. This was a countdown with no finish. A punishment that rejected the mercy of time itself. Crucifixion, for all its agony, rarely lasted more than 3 days. The nails tore tendons. The arms collapsed inward. The lungs drowned in their own weight. A slow suffocation. Brutal, yes, but merciful compared to this. Ling Chi, the death by 1,000 cuts, 3 to 5 days at most. Each incision calculated, deliberate. Skin flayed in petals, organs exposed like offerings. But once shock set in, the mind departed. The body followed. Flaying? Hours. Maybe less. The skin peeled from the muscle, the nerves screaming until they snapped like frayed cords. No one endured it long. Being buried alive? Minutes to panic. Hours to breathe. Then the earth steals the air, and everything fades in silence. But this offered no such mercy. 17 days of being eaten, not all at once, but slowly. From the eyes inward. From the soft parts outward. The body, your body, can only sustain so many wounds. But Scaphism doesn't tear. It doesn't strike. It waits. It invites. It lets the living world come to feast. Insects don't kill you fast. They're architects of decay. Flies lay their eggs. Maggots hatch. They crawl. They burrow. They build colonies beneath the skin. They expand their reach day by day, hour by hour. By day 3, the fever begins. Your immune system screams into overdrive. By day 5, the diarrhea has returned in waves. Dehydrating, weakening, dissolving muscle tone. By day 7, infection takes root in the wounds. Gangrene blooms like a black flower around the wrists, under the arms, at the joints. By day 10, necrosis sets in. The flesh dies. but the nerves still report back to a brain that will not shut down. You're hallucinating now. The insects have become voices. The sun becomes a second skull above you, cracking open with every hour. You cry, but only from one eye. The other has collapsed under swelling. You try to breathe, but the air is thick with rot. Your own rot. By day 14, your organs are liquefying in place. But still, they whisper that you moved. They swear you twitched. And so they do not end it. They wait, just a little longer. Because this is not execution. This is demonstration. And your body has become the lesson. Even today, forensic experts struggle to fully grasp how such a process could endure so long. Modern medicine tells us that a body exposed to infection, insect infestation, heat stroke, and starvation should collapse within a week. But what if you were kept just barely alive? Force-fed, watered, watched. What if survival was part of the sentence? Not to preserve life, but to prolong death. This wasn't just pain. It was precision, an engineered descent, a masterpiece of suffering. If this was the slowest death in human history, don't scroll like nothing happened. Subscribe now, and help us tell the stories even historians flinch from. Still won't subscribe? Let us know why in the comments. But don't pretend this didn't shake you, because no part of this was designed to be ignored. It was said to have happened, but only once, only to one man, and only in the words of those who stood outside the empire that allegedly did it. The most detailed account comes from Plutarch, writing centuries after the event. He wasn't there. He never saw the body, but he wrote of it as if he could smell the rot himself. 2 boats, milk, honey, 17 days. He described it not as myth, but as memory. But whose memory was it? And why did it survive? There are no Persian records that mention Scaphism. No royal decree. No trial transcript. No execution report etched into clay. And in an empire known for recording everything, from grain tallies to celestial omens, that absence is loud. Too loud. The Achaemenid kings left behind thousands of inscriptions. They documented war, law, taxes, lineage. But not this. Not the most grotesque punishment in recorded history. Not the one designed to terrify. Why? There are 2 possibilities. 1, it never happened. 2, it wasn't meant to be remembered. There is no archaeological evidence. No preserved execution platform. No burial site. No tools. No remains. Nothing beneath the soil to whisper truth back through the centuries. And the word itself, Scaphism, is Greek, not Persian. There's no known equivalent in Old Persian or Elamite or Aramaic. Not even in the ceremonial language of the kings. It exists only in the vocabulary of their enemies. So what are we left with? A Greek word, written by a Greek hand, describing a Persian crime, centuries after the fact, at a time when Persia was no longer feared, but remembered, through the lens of conquest, resentment, and propaganda. It is possible that this execution was imagined, a myth crafted to paint an enemy as monstrous, to justify war, to elevate one civilization by dehumanizing another. But is that all it was? Because if it was a lie, it was told with surgical detail. If it was propaganda, it was composed with the patience of a priest writing scripture. And if it never happened, why does it feel like it could have? Some stories are too specific to dismiss, too cruel to forget, too perfect in their horror to be accidental. Maybe this never happened. Or maybe it did and they buried every trace. If you believe the truth still matters, subscribe to Chronicles. If you don't, the comments are open. But remember, silence has a cost. And some lies survive because no one dared to answer them. The Persians may have given it a name, but they were not alone in the art of erasing men slowly. Every empire, every throne that trembled at the whisper of rebellion, had its own answer to defiance. Scaphism was just one of many, one method on a long, unbroken chain forged by fear and spectacle. The Greeks had siphonism, a punishment that sounds almost poetic. But it wasn't. The condemned was bound, stuffed into a cramped wooden barrel or trough, left in the open, exposed to insects, starvation, rot. Sound familiar? It wasn't about speed. It was about watching the body decay in public, slowly becoming the lesson itself. They didn't just kill, they taught. And their lesson was silence. The Romans preferred clarity. Their message was nailed in place. Crucifixion. It didn't matter what you did, thieves, slaves, rebels. All found the same ending. Wrists pierced, lungs collapsing under their own weight, days spent baking beneath the Mediterranean sun. They died naked, broken, gasping. Not in dungeons, but in full view. Because to the Romans, the purpose of execution wasn't justice. It was order. It was fear. And for those who earned deeper cruelty, damnatio ad bestias. Thrown to lions, torn by leopards, eaten alive in amphitheaters while crowds roared and nobles watched. The slow death was a performance, and the empire applauded. In the East it wore a different mask, Ling Chi. The Chinese called it death by 1,000 cuts. The term is metaphor now, but once it was policy. Executed with knives, the condemned was sliced, piece by piece, arms, legs, torso, face. Each wound delivered methodically, not to kill, to extend, to keep the soul awake as long as the pain could carry it. And Egypt, the cradle of kings and gods, knew patience too. Those who offended the temples were sometimes wrapped alive, mummified before death, suffocating slowly beneath linen soaked in resin, breath caught in cloth, heartbeats slowing in darkness. They were denied not only life, but the afterlife, sealed in flesh, abandoned in tombs meant for the damned. Time passes, empires fall, but cruelty evolves. Today we don't feed men to insects. We feed them to silence, to isolation, to the unlit corners of concrete cells where the lights never go out and no voice ever answers back. Solitary confinement, psychological degradation, sleep deprivation. These are not ancient. They are now. They wear lab coats and clipboards. They speak of rehabilitation but deliver breakdown. Because the instinct is older than writing. If you can't silence the truth, you can starve it, blind it, bury it where no one dares to look. This is not a story about Persia. It's a timeline of what humans do when power feels threatened. From wooden boats to stone amphitheaters to locked rooms behind surveillance glass. Only the tools have changed, not the intent. So ask yourself, how different are we? How far have we really come? And if you think these stories belong in shadows, then scroll past. But if you feel the echo still moving in your chest, subscribe to Chronicles. Because the world remembers what you choose to repeat. And cruelty thrives when no one's left to call it by name. On day 10 your eyes are gone, but you still feel them twitching. Not from sight has long abandoned you, but from the movement underneath. The soft digging, the wet pressure, the tiny limbs of things that do not sleep. You stopped screaming 3 days ago, not because the pain has faded, but because your throat has split. The sound is trapped now, dry and cracked behind a swollen tongue that tastes only rot. Your skin peels without effort. The sun has cooked it loose. The insects have hollowed it out. You are no longer solid. You are softening. You were fed again today, not by choice. They opened your mouth with sticks, poured more of that warm, spoiled sweetness into you. Milk turned to slime, honey reeking of fermentation. You vomited. They poured again. The fever is constant now. It burns through your chest, behind your eyes, under your fingernails. You are slick with sweat, but the breeze offers no relief. Because there is no breeze. Only the heat. And the flies. They never leave. You feel them gather in the folds of your neck, crawling beneath what remains of your ears, slipping between your toes, building homes inside your body. And when night comes, it brings no darkness. Only a deeper kind of light. A red light. A light behind your eyelids that pulses with every heartbeat. You hallucinate constantly. You see faces in the clouds. Faces of those who betrayed you, who cheered when the first boat was lowered. You hear music in the buzzing. Low chants, funeral songs, promises of freedom you know are lies. You are not entirely alone. There are things beneath you in the water. They brush against the base of the boat. Sometimes they rise. Sometimes they bite. On day 12, your tongue splits at the center. It no longer holds words, only taste, and what it tastes is death. You begin to speak to the rot. You ask it questions. You pray to the maggots. You weep, though your tears are just salt now, burning down the raw paths of your cheeks. You try to surrender, but surrender requires will, and you no longer have any. The body fights for life even when the soul begs to leave. And so you remain, half there, half eaten, completely seen, by the sky, by the water, by the endless eyes of insects, by the men who pass by and do not stop. The wood beneath you is beginning to crack. Not from age, from acid, from waste, from the slow digestion of everything you used to be. And still you are not dead. Still they say it is not yet over. Still they watch. He had no way to escape. But you can scroll away, can't you? Unless you choose to remember him. Subscribe to Cursed Chronicles and be the witness he never had. And if you won't, explain why in the comments. We're waiting. Why was this remembered? Why this man, whose name was never carved, whose body left no trace, whose voice was swallowed by insects? Why him? Why this death? Not the millions who vanished in war. Not the rulers whose crimes were buried with gold, but a single man in a boat, rotting beneath the sun. Because some stories aren't meant to be mourned. They're meant to be used. This was not preserved out of pity. It was not whispered through time because someone grieved for the man. It was remembered because someone needed it. The kings who came after wanted fear, not loyalty. And fear needs stories. Stories that creep under the skin, that teach obedience better than any sword. Stories that do not need to be seen to be believed. The people didn't ask if it happened. They asked if it could. And that was enough. The image alone of a man being fed to his own decay was a masterpiece of terror. Empires thrive on myth, not just of heroes and gods, but of punishments, of what happens when someone steps out of line. Not just killed but erased. Transformed from flesh into warning, turned into something less than human and more than legend, because legends don't die, and neither do the systems that build them. He became a whisper passed from father to son, from scribe to priest, a name that didn't need to be remembered, because the method was enough. They didn't need to know who he was, only what was done to him. It was useful, parable for loyalty, a scripture of fear. And the silence around him? That was part of the power. Because when something so monstrous goes unspoken, it grows. It mutates. It becomes untouchable. A ghost in the foundations of law, order, kingship. Unquestioned. Undefied. It is not just cruelty that keeps thrones stable. It is memory. Selective memory. Controlled memory. And so this death was never fully confirmed. But never quite denied. It floated in the gray space between fact and myth, where propaganda thrives best. That is the true genius of it. He didn't die quietly, and neither will this story. Subscribe to Cursed Chronicles if you believe truth, however dark, deserves to be heard. And if you'd rather let this be forgotten, the comments are waiting. But know this, silence isn't neutral. It serves someone. If a man dies in darkness and no one remembers, was he ever alive at all? 17 days. That was the sentence. Not in chains. Not in stone. But in time. 17 days of rot. Of breath without mercy. Of skin surrendering to the crawl of life too small to name. No grave. No tomb. No final words. Just the sound of wood expanding in the heat. And the hum of 1,000 wings. We never knew him. Not truly. We don't know his face. His birthplace, his crime. We only know his death. And even that maybe never happened. Or maybe it did. Exactly as told, but scrubbed clean from the archives of empire. A punishment so precise, so engineered, that no one dared write it down. So we are left with fragments. A Greek name, a bitter rumor, and a method too cruel to be coincidence. This is the mystery. A death no one witnessed, yet everyone feared. A story too sharp to dull with time. This is the horror. Not the insects, not the fever, but the silence. the willingness of a world to let a man dissolve so completely that only his pain survived. This is the legacy, a death that outlived its executioners, a rumor that walked through centuries, wearing the face of truth just well enough to be believed. And this is the lesson, that power will always preserve what benefits it, that cruelty doesn't need proof, it needs an audience, and that the line between myth and memory is drawn by those who survive to tell it. But now you have heard it. You can't unknow it. You can't bury it again. So the choice is yours. His skin rotted. His mind cracked. His name was erased. But if you subscribe, he becomes unforgettable. This is Cursed Chronicles, where the past never rests. And if you won't subscribe, tell us why in the comments. But don't say you weren't moved.